Hey, Shepherd family, this is Pastor Scott Seidler. Welcome to another episode of our Shepherd podcast, an opportunity to talk with people making a difference in the Christian church, regional, national, even international thought leaders who are helping others walk with Jesus Christ faithfully every single day. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Jerry Kieschnick, a dear friend of mine and the former president of the Lutheran Church-Missouri Synod, now the Chief Executive Officer for Legacy Deo, formerly the Lutheran Foundation of Texas. Jerry helps people generate their charitable urges toward things that matter for Christ's mission. I look forward to pulling on his ear and pulling on his heart to learn a little bit more about how it is that he's walking faithfully with the Lord Jesus Christ these days, after just last week celebrating 50 years of ordained ministry as a pastor in the Lutheran Church. Jerry, welcome. Hey, what's shaking in Texas?
Thank you, Pastor Seidler, Brother Scott. What's shaking in Texas? Well, it's like December 25th right here, right now. It's 90 degrees outside in Texas. I'm sorry. It's June 17th, and it's 90 degrees here in Texas. Terry and I are settled in here in our home that's been built 5 years ago for us, and we're just, let's see, I don't know if we're living the dream, but pretty cotton picking close to it. We are blessed with good health. We have wonderful kids and grandkids and lots of good friends. It's good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And say hello to your dear wife, Terry, too. I know that over 50 years of ministry, she has been your faithful partner, and you have been her faithful partner through all the ways that you've walked through the mission and ministry of Jesus Christ. How's she doing?
You know what? She's doing fine. About 4 years ago, she got 2 new hips, and she's ready for another 100,000 miles. I'm telling you, she's going.
I love it.
Blessed.
She
loves to cook and entertain. She's kind of frustrated right now because, you can't have a bunch of people over, and we're used to having a bunch of people over. So she's doing fine otherwise.
Yeah, you were legends when it came to hosting at your home the Council of Presidents, 35 presidents and their wives in your home in St. Louis, welcoming them, showing them lavish hospitality, and enjoying conversation beyond just leading the church, making sure that you were friends and colleagues in ministry more than just fellow administrators.
We highly value relationships. Very important. Yep.
Hey, one of the things that occurs to me I'm 25 years in the ministry this year. One of the things that occurs to me is that over 50 years, you've been through so many slogans, mission statements, vision statements, core values statements. You've heard of church growth. You've heard of authenticity. You've heard of missional discipleship and all these kinds of words. I think every season of ministry brings a new word, a new theme, a new mantra to bear on our hearts and in our leadership. What's the slogan that you're kind of working with these days that's leading you forward in ministry?
I started to wear a polo shirt from the past that says, "One people forgiven." But I thought, well, that's about 10, 12 years old. Maybe you'll think I don't have any newer clothing than that, so I didn't wear that one. But I love that one, "One people forgiven." Yeah. What I'm really working with today, frankly, and this has sort of guided me throughout my life, consciously or unconsciously, it's the story from Matthew 20, where the mother of James and John says, "Jesus, will you put my boys at your right and left side?" And Jesus said something like, "No." But really, he ended up saying, "The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve." Yeah. So that's what frankly drives me. I love to serve. There were years ago, I was in New Orleans for a Southern District event. There was a bunch of people around sitting down and eating at a big bunch of tables in the gymnasium or something. Somebody just filled a plate of food and a glass of tea all over the floor. I wasn't anywhere around, praise the Lord, but I saw it, and that lady was so embarrassed. So I got up right quick, and I went over to the person in charge. I said, "Is there a mop somewhere around?" And that lady pointed out to the closet. So I went to the closet and got a mop and a bucket. I went over there and started mopping it up. Everybody came and said, No, President Kieschnick, you shouldn't be mopping it up." I said, "Why not? Who better to mop it up than me?" So, that's just the kind of thing I enjoy doing, because my mother and daddy raised me to be humble and to work hard and to not think more highly of myself than I ought. So not to be served, but to serve.
You know, it's a time right now with big themes worldwide. We've got COVID, we've got social unrest in America, and it's easy with all the big media outlets to get lost in all the big stuff that's going on. But you're reminding us that sometimes it means just looking what is right in front of your nose, looking at what is right in front of your nose, and actually getting to the business that God's calling you to within 10 feet, within that socially distanced space that we're told of, to actually just get after doing something significant. I mean, and that's really been a key theme of your life as you've challenged, certainly church leadership, but everyday pastors. Remember, the mission and ministry is not somewhere far away from you, but the mission and ministry is right before you in your community. Talk a little bit about what it means to minister in your community, and especially how you and Terry are going about doing ministry in your own region now back in Texas.
Well, ministry in the community, I'm glad you mentioned that, actually. So the deal is we've moved back to Texas in 2010 and lived in one home for a while, and decided we needed a single-story home. So we built a home in a brand new neighborhood subdivision. We were the second home to be built. So we got to watch people as they moved in. We got to meet people. It was in that season of time that Terry was having her hip issues before those surgeries. So I bought a golf cart, and we just drove around the neighborhood in the golf cart, and we'd meet people who were jogging or working in the yard or taking the trash out, and we'd stop and we introduce ourselves and just start talking. So we got to know them, to meet them. It's an interesting neighborhood, but not everybody in our neighborhood is actively involved in an organized church. But I am blown away, frankly, by the level of spirituality that I discern when I read their postings on Facebook. It really is amazing. And they're not reticent about expressing their faith whatsoever. So what we're doing, since I'm the only clergyman in the neighborhood, that may come as a shock to you, but I'm the only pastor. And everybody knows it. Not that I wear it on my forehead, and not that I beat a drum and say, I'm a pastor, but people ask, who are you? Right. Where you been? Where you been? What are you doing? So on a couple of occasions, I've been invited by neighbors to conduct funeral services for their parents. And just recently, I was invited to do a wedding for the daughter of our almost next door neighbor. So when it comes time for neighborhood gatherings and potlucks and parties, it's a kind of a social group. Almost every time, somebody, whoever's hosting, will say, okay, we're going to start with a prayer. Jerry, would you pray? So it's one of those opportunities that Terry and I have, and she's a whole lot better at it than I am. All that stuff she's better at than I am. But she's developed great relationships with the women in this neighborhood, and they call on her, confide in her, and she ministers to them in a marvelous, marvelous way. So that's part of what's going on in our neighborhood. And we do that also in our community, in our congregation, in the community at large, among our staff people at the district office where I'm still working, all those kinds of things, audiences, people, opportunities abound just to provide a listening ear and to provide a word of hope and encouragement and consolation in many cases.
In the Old West, they used to not have neon signs. They had shingles, and they put them outside the storefront and said, we're open. It's one of my wife Renee's favorite images is when she comes home and she's had a long conversation with someone who's confided in her, sought her advice. She'll come home and she said, I must have had my shingle out today because, I got an earful and couldn't get away and didn't really want to get away because I was doing something meaningful for the spiritual care of another person's soul. And I know that you and Terry have always been thoughtful. You've never been in a rush. I've always appreciated that about you. You never had, somewhere more important to go in conversations with Renee and I. And it's no surprise that you're continuing that tradition in the new neighborhood you're living in down there in Texas. My guess is, though, that over 50 years, as you look back and have been thinking about your ordained ministry and beyond that, just your life as a child of God, there's probably been some conversation between you and your beloved wife about ways in which each of you have changed. How is Jerry Kieschnick a different Christian today than he was 50 years ago? What's changed since, 1970 you ordained? Which, by the way, just for our listeners, that's the year I was born. So I'm not saying Jerry is Moses, but may know him, may know him. But Jerry, 50 years, it's amazing. What has changed for you as a child of God walking faithfully with your Lord?
I may not be Moses, but I'm more like Methuselah. Is that what you're saying, Scott?
I didn't say that.
Yeah, you didn't say it, but you're thinking it. I know you well enough to know that. Well, one thing has changed is my hair. It's not as dark as it used to be. We went through a bunch of slides from the garage just a couple weeks ago. Said, who is that guy that's got all that dark hair on his head? So the deal is that I think other people could probably notice the changes. Probably Terry would notice the changes and be able to articulate them a little bit more clearly than I. But here's my perception. My perception is that I'm not taking myself as seriously anymore as I used to. I've always been a driven man, and I attribute that to what I say. I'm only half as smart as you are, so I've got to work twice as hard as you are to accomplish the same amount of work.
Yeah.
So I'm not taking myself as seriously, number one. Number two, I'm paying more attention to the truth of Psalm 90, verse 12. And that is, Lord, teach us to number our days and apply our hearts unto wisdom. Yeah. I think also in the process, I have, and I need to cough right here, excuse me. I'm also, I believe, more deeply respecting people of Christian persuasion in a different way than I have in the past, people of different Christian persuasions. I've come to realize that the LCMS, I've always known it cognitively, but I'm really, I think, more nearly viscerally come into an understanding of this, that LCMS, Lutheran Church-Missouri Synod, we're not the only game in town. And we're not going to be the only people in heaven. So we should also, I think, approach life with a greater degree of humility and with a greater degree of understanding and trying to understand what makes other people tick and what makes other Christian tribes function, and what are their priorities, what can we learn from other Christian people. So that's a second thing. Third thing is, in my prayer life, I'm praying more nearly for the Lord's will to be done in my life. I'm tempted, and I've in the past been pretty guilty of this, namely spelling out what I think the Lord ought to be doing and what I think my life should be doing and what it should be like, saying, now, Lord, would you help me accomplish these things? Instead of waiting on the Lord and trying to discern through every day and living every day and listening every day and keeping my nose to the grindstone every day, what in fact the Lord really wants me to do and who he wants me to be. So what's happened as a result is that in the past, when I would outline to the Lord what I wanted him to accomplish for me, when it didn't happen, I was always disappointed because things didn't turn out the way I wanted it to turn out. So now I believe, at least I try, don't always accomplish it, but I try to be more nearly open to the Spirit's leading and guiding rather than directing the Spirit's leading and guiding of my life.
It is a very, very difficult thing, I think, for anybody to be agile when it comes to walking with the Lord. We certainly make our plans. I think there's even a proverb that goes along these lines. We make our plans, but the Lord is the one who directs our ways. And so having that capacity to receive in an agile fashion how the Lord in a moment is directing our ways is just such a critical capacity. and especially because we don't live in a homogeneous culture anymore. We've got all kinds of religions. We've got all kinds of nationalities. I just was talking with President John Nunes from Concordia in Bronxville, New York, Concordia University. And he was talking about how there's 812 languages being spoken in New York City. I think that was the number that he gave. We are being inundated with diversity just by the sheer fact that America is this melting pot. And every day, the ability to pray, first and foremost, Lord, help me engage this diverse nation in a way that honors you, that shows people the love of Jesus, is such an important function of life. How is now we were just full disclosure, you were a member of my congregation at Concordia Lutheran Church in Kirkwood, Missouri. Now you're at a church, I believe, am I right? In not Wahlberg, Texas. You're living in Wahlberg, but you are in a new church. Tell me about life in your new congregation as one who's being pastored, not the one who's doing the pastoring.
Well, we moved back to Georgetown when we left St. Louis. Georgetown is a suburb north of Austin, about 30 miles. And actually in 1981, and that was almost before you were born, you were still in, what, fourth grade? Something like that?
Yeah, pretty close, fifth.
We moved here to Georgetown and started what at that time, 39 years ago, was a brand new church, brand new mission from scratch. When we left and moved to St. Louis, obviously we joined Concordia Kirkwood, a wonderful congregation, a couple of great pastors. And then we came back and we decided to have to look for a different ecclesiastical experience. Frankly, a lot of people in the church we started in 1981 were gone, and new people would come in, and we knew more people out of this little church in the country. It is in Wahlberg, Texas, Walburg. There are two restaurants. They used to be bars and taverns, but now they serve food too in Wahlberg. And there's a post office. The post office is a single wide mobile home. So there's not a whole lot in Wahlberg, but there are two churches. There's the church, the lower church, and there's the upper church. Well, we're the upper church, and we're 10 feet higher, I think, in elevation than the lower church. The lower church used to be an ELCA church. Now it's an LCMC church, and we're the LCMS up on the hill. And there are probably 1,000 baptized members. And before COVID hit, we had about 450, 500 people that would come to worship on an average weekend. It's an interesting thing because we have both a bunch of the old timers, at least the children, the progeny of the old timers who are themselves now old timers. And we also have a bunch of youngsters who've come into the congregation from the region, beyond the little community of Wahlberg. So it's an interesting thing to see the interaction of people from different generations, different cultures, the rural and farming culture on the one hand, and the high-tech culture on the other hand. And sometimes that causes a little bit of rub and a little bit of spark going on. But it's fascinating to see that what brings us all together, what ties us all together, is our faith. It's a movement of the Spirit, to the extent that we're in a $6 million building program, and $4 million of those dollars were raised in the capital campaign. She just kind of blew me away that people responded that way. There's a Lutheran school in the congregation, which is it's a high priority for people in the church. Christian education is highly valued. So it's a different experience. And in our case, this is the first time we belong to a church in a small community.
Yeah.
Just hundreds of people live in Wahlberg, not thousands.
Right.
It's a different feel, but it's a great congregation, wonderful pastors, great other lay leaders as well.
The interaction of generations here in Scottsdale, we not only have the interaction of generations from, war and baby boomer generation down to Gen Y, Gen Zs, but we also have a lot of geographical diversity because generally speaking, nobody grows up in Scottsdale. Now that's changing as Phoenix becomes its own city, but a number of my congregation members are bringing in experiences from dozens of churches throughout the country. And as you think about the generational changes going on, and you have your two grandchildren, I always like to ask you about them, but how are you passing on the faith into your children, your grandchildren, and how has that become more challenging in these days that we're living in?
You know, our grandchildren are now 25 and 24 years of age. That makes our children 50 and 47 years of age. That's about your age, if I am doing the numbers correctly.
That's right.
They were raised in the church, raised in the faith. Our grandson and granddaughter both live away from our town. They're both university graduates. Granddaughter is a registered nurse. We saw her for dinner last night, actually.
Love it.
Drove to her town and had dinner with her and drove back home. Our grandson is also on his own. They both live about 3 hours away from where we live. Our grandson was working in West Texas last year, and one of his first questions was, "Peepaw," that's what he calls me, "is there a Lutheran church in Midland?" I said, "Yes, there is." So I looked up the church. I know the pastor very well. So I called the pastor and said, "There's a young man who may be darkening your church door. He looks a little bit like me, except he's a lot younger than I am. But be on the lookout. He may or may not introduce himself as the grandson of the former president of the Lutheran Church-Missouri Synod. But just extend a regular warm welcome to him." Well, he became very actively involved in that church. Our granddaughter is active in a different faith group right now. It's not LCMS Lutheran, but I'm thankful to the Lord that both of those young people are not doing what I see a lot of younger people do, and that's to have no affiliation, no association whatsoever with the organized church or even with any other reflection of the body of Christ. It's a different world. It's a different life. And as I said about my neighbors several minutes ago, I think it's true of a lot of children and grandchildren. They may or may not be connected with the organized church, but they are deeply spiritual people. And that's something I think that we need to recognize, especially those of us who are heavily involved with the organized church. We need to get over the fact that not everybody is going to follow our lead and do what we've done all our lives. I think I can count on this hand the number of Sundays in 77 years that I haven't been in church. I mean, really, I'm not bragging about that. It's just right. Who we are. Right. But it's a different deal today.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think about that phrase that we've often used in the church, remember your baptism, remember that you are baptized. One of the things that I have to tell myself, and I remind the older adults in my congregation, remember that you are baptized. And when you think about the faith of your children or your grandchildren that you're so concerned about, remember that your baptism is what should be prompting you to speak a word of faith, of hope into their lives, a reminder that there is a God. There's a God who loves them and acts and is a living God. He's not some mute idol, sitting on the fireplace mantle. And so it's not just about, boy, I hope their baptism kicks in, when they're older and having kids. Remember, you are baptized, older adult, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, in order for you to give a faithful witness. And again, I think that's such an important piece. Hey, Jerry, we're going to take a quick break. And after we come back on the other side of this break, we're going to get a little bit more into the administrative side of the church. I want to pick your brain as I look and survey mainline Christianity in America on the decline. Your thoughts about what Christianity in America will be looking like in the next 10 to 20 years. So hang on, and we'll be right back after this break. Hey, this is Pastor Scott Seidler. We're back and continuing our conversation with Dr. Jerry Kieschnick on this episode of our Shepherd podcast. You know, as we wrapped up in the last segment, we were talking a lot about what it means to walk with God faithfully as an individual, but also to help those entrusted to our care, our family members particularly, walk with God. And just a follow-up question, Jerry, as you think about being a parent to your daughters, as you think about being a grandparent, just add a little color commentary to what it means in this generation, in this season of ministry and life in America, to be a parent, to be a grandparent.
You know, I wish that I had known then what I know now about being a parent. One of the things that I tell people these days about parenthood, if they still are parents or fixing to be parents, is something that an elderly man, even older than I, told me many years ago. He said, save your no, for the things that really count. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if your kids ask you to do something or they want to get something, if it's just a little minor blip on the screen of eternity, don't just automatically say no. Say, okay. That way, when they ask for something or ask to get permission to do something that's really important enough for you to say no, all of a sudden that no will sound different to them than what they've been hearing. So save your no for the things that really count. The second thing that I learned the hard way is that spouses and children spell love Time. I said before that I'm a driven man. I am. I work hard. I work long. And I've realized over the years that just spending time with spouse and with kids is so important. I remember the times when my father, who was also, guess what, a driven man, spent time with me. Those were few and far between times, but they were important times, important enough to be etched into my memory bank. So those are the things. Just be generous about time and be generous about permission, except when it's important not to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, I think about saying no. And this coming weekend here at Shepherd of the Desert, my next sermon in our Reopening Christianity worship series that's online is built around the question, are you going to be known more for what you're against, what you're saying no to, or are you going to be known more for what you say yes to? And in the Christian church, in the institutional Christian church in America these days, to build off of kind of what you just talked about regarding rearing and raising a family, the Christian church in America is certainly known for what we say no to, what we do not affirm, reject. And that has given us a little bit of a black eye. And certainly God is holy. And his standards are the right standards, and they are the only standards. So what God says yes to, we say yes to. What God says no to, we say no to, and we don't apologize for that. But I think, and I'm sure you'd agree with me on this, I'm hoping you'll agree with me at least, Jerry, is that we've really become great as Christians at saying no to a lot of things. And people do not hear us clearly saying yes to the things that God values. Talk a little bit about the next 5 to 10, 15 years of Christianity in America from your point of view as a not only a leader administratively, but one who is a thought leader in what it means to be the institutional church, the Church of Jesus Christ organized in America.
And you want me to do that in 25 words or less, huh?
You know, you can take an hour or two, but I'm just saying that my battery on my computer is going to die. So
I get it.
Wherever it gets us.
A few thoughts. First of all, I think we have to be careful when we make prognostications and definitive statements about life and faith. You have to be careful not to give the impression that we are always right about everything, because sometimes we're not always right about everything. In my lifetime, I've seen reversals of the position of our own church body on such matters as dancing. My pastor told me, you can't go dancing. Don't be doing that, even though most of my peers and my peers' parents did it. Small sense of guilt here and there. Insurance. This was but a little bit before my time, and in those days, insurance was kind of demonstrating a lack of trust in God's ability to provide. Oh, that's changed big time. Big time. The Boy Scouts. Before I was born, Boy Scouts were anathema. They were seen as maybe not a secret society, but pretty darn close to it. Well, those things have changed. And there are some other issues about which we make pretty strong dogmatic statements that may or may not prove at the end of the day and in times to come to actually be worthy of that dogmatic kind of position and statement. I think secondly, we as an organized church and we as clergy, we as leaders, need to pay a whole lot more attention to the priesthood of all believers. We've got people in our church who are very intelligent, obviously. We got people in our church that are a whole lot smarter than me, maybe not smarter than you, but they're smarter than me. And they're highly educated, biblically literate, say that 10 times in a row quickly. They know scripture, they know Christian doctrine, they understand life and the application of Christian belief to the life that they live, which is a more real life, frankly, than guys like you and me are living. We live kind of a sheltered life in a lot of respects. As an ecclesiastical supervisor, I got out of that shelter a little bit because I learned a lot about other clergy and about other people. But the point here is we need to pay more attention to the priesthood of all believers and get over this hyper-clericalism, which says, it's kind of a reversal to the old days of Herr Pastor. The pastor is the guy in charge and he knows everything and what he says goes. Well, as we say in Texas today, that dog won't hunt. People
yes!
get it. People get it when a pastor tries to make them believe that he is smarter than they are and he's got the last word in everything.
Right.
So the whole issue of something which I drug my feet and kicked and screamed when somebody first taught me about collaboration. I said, I don't like collaboration. I'm a fairly decisive guy. I think I understand enough about life and faith to know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So I want to do it this way. But I've discovered over the years that collaboration, even though I don't really like it, is a very important process to engage people and to get them to develop a sense of ownership and whatever the problem is and what the solution finally ends up being. And there's a whole lot more that we could be delegating to the priesthood of all believers, to lay men and lay women, that for some crazy reason we clergy have thought, no, we can do it better than they can. No, they can do it better than we can.
Yeah.
One simple illustration, frankly, is I think the whole issue of dealing with people, helping people, understanding people, providing consolation and guidance to people who are experiencing certain maladies and problems in life. I've had prostate cancer. When we first moved to St. Louis, I had prostate cancer and I had my prostate removed. Well, that's 19 years ago, almost 19 years ago. And I think I know a little bit about what it feels like to get the diagnosis of prostate cancer. And I know what it's like to be on the operating table and kissing your wife goodbye, wondering if I'm ever going to see her again this side of heaven. And I know what it's like to go through the process of recovery and the process of restoration of bodily functions. And So I become kind of a go-to guy
Right.
for other people, other guys who have prostate cancer. The word gets out, Kieschnick had that stuff. So I talk on the phone frequently with guys and with their spouses. Terry talks with their spouse. Here's what you can expect. Maybe it might be different in your case, but so the point is this.
Yeah.
I don't know how to relate to a woman who has breast cancer, but there are women in our congregation who do, and they do a whole heck of a lot better job of ministering to a woman who has breast cancer than I would ever be able to do.
Yeah.
That's only one of many illustrations about trusting people of God to do the ministry which needs to be done with people both in our congregations and beyond our congregations.
Yeah.
I think we also, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I just can't underscore what you just said boldly enough. A couple weeks back on the Shepherd podcast, had Dale Cryingcamp, a mutual friend of ours, who, having walked through a couple seasons of unemployment himself, has now become essentially, I would argue bluntly, the resident expert in our Lutheran Church-Missouri Synod church body on the topic of ministry to those who are unemployed. In a sense, he is a pastor to that specific segment. Just like we have mission pastors that go to this locale or this geographical place, Dale has carved out for himself a ministry affirmed through many different interactions and conversations. And I can't agree with you anymore. And we are filled, not just the Lutheran Church-Missouri Synod, but the Church of Jesus is filled by so many lay people who have this ability to do something that's not only right in front of their nose, but God has already cultivated and established in their heart, in their life experience. I interrupted you. Continue.
In the process, it's great to know that people who provide that kind of ministry are fulfilled. They feel like they're really contributing to the ministry of the church as a whole, and they are. And it provides additional time and energy for the pastor to do things that only pastors can do. So it's just a sharing of the ministry with the people of the church. I mean, we are all ministers of Christ. The third and last point that I'd make, I think, is that we need to realize the fact and deal with it that I believe no longer is the major locus of Christian influence the Sunday morning experience in a building, a worship facility. I love the Lord Jesus. I love to worship. I love traditional worship. I love contemporary worship, as long as those are both well done, not medium rare or half baked, but well done. Ribeye, medium rare. Worship service, well done.
Sure. That's awesome.
But to realize that I think what COVID-19 has taught us, namely that there can be an exponential increase of influence of the church through what we're doing right now, through the media, through Zoom, through Facebook, through recorded, live streamed, or post-recorded playbacks of worship, of Bible study, of conversations about faith and life. There are lots of ways that the church can be a whole lot more influential than just, if we build it, they will come. If we advertise welcome on the church sign out on the front road, on the street, people will say, oh, I guess I should come. That's simply not happening these days, unless and until people go through a crisis of some kind. Yep. And actively seek out some kind of help, some kind of assistance, and something in their experience tells them, I should go to that church. That's happened. It does happen, and it will continue to happen. But that cannot be our primary and sole focus, thinking that that's the only way we're going to get people to come to church. I said for years, maybe you heard it said when I was in the office of the presidency of our church body, we have to figure out ways to get what goes on in the church, to get the sense of faith, of hope, of trust, of confidence, of guidance for life that's in the church. We have to figure out a way to take that to the world. And all of a sudden, the good Lord allows COVID-19 to happen. And Man, it's wonderful. I'm telling pastors these days, when you start back having your public worship services and people are coming to your church, you cannot afford the luxury, if it's a luxury, of quitting what you've been doing. That's attracted many times more people to your circle of influence than was happening when the only game in town was your worship service in person,
I
live.
think in my conversations with other pastors from other larger congregations, not larger congregations, really any size congregation, the size of the congregation is irrelevant. I noticed that there are essentially two kinds of pastors these days. On the one side, there are those that are consumed with the anxiety, the decision making to get back to in-person worship, with all of the uncertainties, state by state, locale by locality, in actually standing that up. There's no uniform practice of reestablishing in-person worship, and so the anxiety, the level of intensity required for that decision making takes all of their mind share off of what you and I are doing right now, and so many others have really started to do, which is to realize we've got the ability each week to reach hundreds and thousands and even 10,000s of people creatively with messages, ministry programs, initiatives. And so that's the other side, is pastors who are like, and I'm one of them, we're going to do in-person worship, but I'm going to be very, very aware of how much energy, effort, anxiety, mind share I'm giving to that. Because right now we're engaging more people here at Shepherd of the Desert on a week over week basis than I've ever engaged in an entire lifetime of ministry, just because of this opportunity. And it's an awesome and awful opportunity, because the price that is being paid by those that have COVID, have died, families, and so on and so forth, it is an awful experience. And so we're also ministering to that. But there is an opportunity to relearn something, and we're all relearning what life is going to look like in this post-pandemic time. Yeah.
One thing that I haven't learned yet, but I'd sure like to learn it, is what a good friend of mine who's a pastor in Dallas has learned in spades. He's learned the art of an 8-minute message, or even sometimes a 6-minute message. It takes me 4 minutes to say hello, for crying out loud. And this guy just nails it. He really does. He reads his messages, but that's because he has honed and smithed every word, and it just works. And it just goes by like that. And it is so magnetic in terms of just drawing me into listening to how this guy's, how he talks about the faith, and he talks about stuff that's going on in real life too. I mean, it's wonderful.
As I follow up with some of my homiletic students that I had at Concordia Seminary when I was adjuncting there, and we talk through these conversations and or approaches to doing ministry, the way, and I love that you brought this up, the way that I talk about it is, you're going to do two things in an online worship experience. You're either going to have people essentially peering through the window from outside in the parking lot, watching this formerly live thing that was great when it was live and you're in the building and you're with your friends and the sounds and everything is going on. You can smell the coffee getting made by the hospitality team. You're either going to do that, or you're going to create an experience that actually translates through the computer screen into the kitchen, den, or living room, where that online now worship experience is going to be had. And I think you're exactly right on that, Jerry. If you were accustomed to preaching a 30-minute message, back when it was live, and you could flex with the crowd, and you didn't have to, compete with the scrambled eggs and bacon that are getting made in the kitchen behind, the folks that are watching. Well, you could do a 30-minute message, but frankly, I'm certainly not. You're not Billy Graham. You're not Andy Stanley, and I'm not. None of us are Joel Osteen, who have the ability across a digital medium to command attention for 20, 25, 30 minutes. And I think you're exactly right. Learning the art of an 8-10 minute utterance, that's about right. You know, it's a nice nosh. It's not something overblown, but it's also not so short that it's just a devotional blip that comes out of your mind. I really appreciate you saying that, Jerry. Thank you.
Like I say, I have not mastered that yet, because this past Monday, my funeral message was like 17 minutes.
Yeah.
So I've got a ways to go with that
Yep.
particular assignment.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Jerry, take a minute as we wrap up here. I do want to leave you with an opportunity, because you don't retire. That's the one thing I know, friends, about Jerry Kieschnick, is there's no such word as retirement in his vocabulary. Jesus Christ calls us to work while it is day, before the night comes when no one can work. And if there are two people that I know that never stop working, Jerry and Terry Kieschnick, those are two of those people. Jerry, you're doing some amazing work right now for an organization called Legacy Deo, helping folks channel their financial resources and their estate planning toward future generations of Christian mission and ministry. Talk just a little bit about that, about your organization, and about especially your experiences helping people cultivate an ongoing spirit of generosity that will outlast their lifetimes.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Actually, Legacy Deo, D-E-O, that's a Latin word for God, used to be Lutheran Foundation of Texas, and it started in 1960 when a family wanted to give their ranch to the church. And the church said, well, thank you very much. What would we do with a ranch? So 4 men got together in Texas, and they formed a 501c3 organization, Lutheran Foundation of Texas. They received the deed to the ranch, sold the ranch, gave the money to the church. Everybody was happy. Donors got to give their money to the church through the ranch. The recipients, the church was happy because they didn't have to mess with the ranch. And the foundation people were happy because they were able to bring those two together and to facilitate that gift. So that's how the organization got started. We are involved now with helping people. This is how I say it in the vernacular. We help people do what they feel called by God to do with what God has entrusted to their care. It's pretty simple. Yep. We encourage people to do estate planning, a basic will, beneficiary designations, maybe a donor advised fund, perhaps a charitable remainder trust, powers of attorney, all those kinds of things that really are important when one gets to the point where they become necessary or mandatory, to have those pieces in place. So that's one of the things that I do. I encourage people to put those legal documents, get those legal documents put together, and to name people to be in charge of those resources, and to tell them what you have, to tell them your passwords.
Yep.
There's so many spouses who don't know their loved one's password. All of a sudden, loved one passes away, and they're just, all that stuff's in the computer. How do I get there? Right. Well, what I'm discovering, number one, is that there are a lot of people who are generous in spirit. What I'm also discovering is that people are very concerned about outliving their resources, because life expectancies are longer today than they used to be. Medical and physical and biological, all those kinds of things that have contributed to a longer life expectancy. And especially if people retire young, like 50 or 60 or 70, I think that's young. They could very well be pushing the limits of living their resources. So there's a generosity built in, but there's a concern about how long do I hold on to the resources I have, which basically kind of leads more people these days to what we call a revocable gift, if they're thinking about making a gift not only to their family, but also to their church or other charitable organizations. If they do a gift in a last will and testament, that's revocable. Number one, you can change your will. Number two, if there's nothing left in your estate when you pass away because you spent it all, well, you just revoke the gift because there's nothing there to give. That's more popular these days than irrevocable gifts. But irrevocable gifts still have a role to play in people's generosity. And those are actual outright gifts, not necessarily just cash gifts, but people are giving appreciated assets. They're giving increased valued stocks and bonds. They were higher in value a few months ago than they are now, but they're coming back. They're also giving real estate. They're giving parts of their retirement plans. There are a lot of different ways for people to give money in addition to just from the checking account or the bank account. What I'm also discovering is that in the midst of that generosity, there is a reticence for giving what we call legacy gifts. Legacy gift to me would be the biggest gift that a person has ever given in his lifetime. It could be 5 figures, it could be 6 figures. In some cases, it's 7 figures. That's $1 million or more. People give those kinds of gifts because a lot of our people are gifted, abundantly blessed with this world's goods. But a lot of people are very reticent about giving money to fund parochial activities, which in their experience really don't make a lot of eternal difference in the world. And they're very reticent, and I think rightly so, to give gifts that will in effect rescue a dysfunctional system or a dysfunctional congregation. They see the congregation spending regular weekly contributions now in a way which is not always the most responsible way. And they say to themselves and to each other, what happens if we give a 6 or 7 figure gift to this congregation? How are they going to spend it? Will people become dependent upon that gift and quit their own regular faithful stewardship? That's not good. That's not healthy. That's not helpful. So the thing I'm finding is to help people figure out what do you want to do with the resources God has given you. Let's take care of your family first. Let's be sure we take care of them. Bible says we should do that. And let's also figure out what makes your heart beat. What really primes your pump? What gets you excited in terms of making a financial gift, a significant financial gift to a ministry? What I'm discovering is that there's greater interest in supporting causes that address human need, both efficiently and effectively. Generosity, in our case, Terry and I have put our plan together, and we've tweaked it and we've changed it a number of times, but our plan together is to take care of our children and grandchildren in stages. We're not going to dump a bunch of money in their laps all at once when the last one of us, she and I, are gone. But we're going to give a lump sum to each of those people when the last one of us passes. But we're going to stretch the rest of it out over a period of years, keeping intact the corpus, the group of dollars, the money that is being invested and also being used to generate income for that period of years for our children and grandchildren. So that when that period of years is up, there's money left, and that money then is going to be divided in 2 ways. Part of it's going to go to support the organized church's activities in the area of actual mission, serious mission work. And mission work obviously goes in a lot of different directions, takes a lot of different forms. But the other second part of it's going to go to charitable organizations who provide relief for people, particularly children, who are experiencing hunger, disability, abuse, homelessness, other chronic maladies. And we're going to have 2 separate endowments that do that. One for the church mission and ministry, and the other one for organizations, some in the church and some outside the church, all Christian focused and based, who take care of those people with special maladies. So that I'm having a ball talking to people about what they have and what they want to do with what they have at their request, making suggestions, otherwise just helping them think through what they already have in their mind that could be the recipient of the blessings that God has entrusted to their care. It is so much fun. It is so rewarding, so fulfilling to see people take a breath of relief because they've taken care of these important things.
You can never go wrong taking care of those people that God values, the alien, the fatherless, and the widow, from the Old Testament, Deuteronomy, the book of Amos. And you can't go wrong either in trusting, the responsibility to spend your remaining funds wisely to those that you love and whose character you trust. My wife Renee and I have talked a lot about setting up a fund where we essentially put to our children the responsibility over the course of time, figure out how to spend this money. Things that you want to invest in, things that you want to see, causes you want to see succeed. Because, right, just throwing it into a bank account of an institution or an organization may not always be the smartest way to go. And if you want that money to really leave a legacy that goes on for a long time beyond your lifetime. Well, hey, Jerry, I am so grateful to catch up with you. And if you and Terry are ever here in the Scottsdale area, you've got a friend in me to stop by, visit our congregation, visit our home, have a dinner. But I can't say enough how much I appreciate your leadership and ministry, your pastoral care of my own family as we walk together those St. Louis days, and to know that you continue that pastoral care and ministry with your beloved wife, Terry, to this day down and back in Texas. So God bless you. Thanks again for joining on the Shepherd Podcast. Shepherd family, this is Pastor Scott Seidler, and thanks again for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again soon on another Shepherd Podcast to come.
Thank you, Scott.